I don't like this topic. This is a tough topic. Don't like talking about my relationship with God. It's challenging. It's awkward. It's vulnerable. Because most of us, we can't talk about relating to God without just replicating the way we relate to our fathers. So if you've got a good relationship with your father, then you have no problem or likelihood talking about your relationship with God. If you have, say, a distant or troubled or complicated relationship with your father, then talking about your relationship with God is going to be a little more challenging. So I've always believed in God. Come on, you bloody idiot. Except for 4 years, from 18 to 22. But never had much of a relationship with God. There have been times in my life when I felt God's presence. But bloody hell. Frankly, prayer usually leaves me cold. And not really the pious type. But only when I reluctantly concluded my life wasn't quite working. I've made my way to a 12-step program in 2011. Then slowly, gingerly, awkwardly, I've been exploring this relationship with God thing. Now I've got a new sponsor. I'm going through the 12 steps once again. And I got this assignment. I have to write a list of all the things I want to let go of, like in my conceptions of God. All the things I want to leave behind, like things I've inherited or grown up with or been taught that just don't work for me. So 12-step, in case you're wondering, it's a spiritual practice. It's compatible, as I understand it, with pretty much any religious tradition. It's not a substitute religion. But in 12-step, God is something real that we depend on, is the source of strength, gives us the courage and strength to do things that we can't do on our own. And you want to experience God from a 12-step perspective. You want to make God real. Like, recovery comes down to how real do you want God to be in your life? And I don't know about you, I find that kind of a scary question, because it just seems to come with like so many restrictions. How real do I want God to be in my life? So got a homework assignment. I have to call people in the program and talk about how do they make God real in their life? Like what do they do to improve their relationship with God? Like how do they access God? How do they experience God? What are the things they do to create that relationship? Go, go, go! Come on! Bloody hell! These drivers, they're bloody lucky they got me showing them what to do, or they'd be absolutely hopeless. I mean, traffic in Los Angeles would be rubbish if it wasn't for me just providing some gentle instruction, guidance. I mean, that's what it means to be a Jew. It's Tikkun Olam. Okay, just shining the light of Torah everywhere I go. Just like giving a little bit of gentle guidance to those who are deluded that you can turn bloody right on a red light in California. Yeah, you can turn right on a bloody red light in California. I think it's the one good thing about California, according to Woody Allen. Alright, so I have to write about my conception of my higher power. Like, what do I want from God? What are the qualities from God that I want? It's not easy for me to do this, so I had to go back to analogies. Some of my favorite physical education teachers, that kind of mentor relationship. When I came to America, they showed me how to play basketball, how to catch a softball with a mitt, how to hit a softball. Like that was Chuck Evans at Pacific Union College who taught me these things. So I kind of like that coach metaphor for God. Then mentor metaphor. I was fairly close with some of my friends' fathers, and I often enjoyed hanging out with my friends' fathers more than I enjoyed hanging out with my friends. So there's mentor relationships. Often after school in high school, I just hang out with some of my teachers after class, and not actually always in classes where I was excelling. Like sometimes where I was struggling to get a C grade, such as biology, I'd still hang out with the teacher after class. I'd kind of be embarrassed by my poor scores, my lack of performance, but I just enjoyed hanging out with my Placer High School biology teacher. When I was ill with chronic fatigue syndrome, a few years later after high school, I even tracked him down, caught him up, and we went for a walk. And I caught up other of my high school teachers when I got sick and I was bedridden for 6 years. Sometimes I talk a lot to their wives. It's kind of lonely from ages 21 to 27, 6 years of chronic fatigue syndrome. Okay, so what things enable me to relate to God, or what things bring me into contact with God? Wow, there's the LAPD. To protect and to serve. Thank you. Thank you, Men in Blue, for your service. So, sacred music can bring me into contact with God. Sacred space, such as synagogue, just walking into a holy home. Being in nature brings me into contact with God. Sacred music, I mentioned that. Sacred literature. Attending 12-step meetings in person, even 12-step phone meetings. When people share honestly, it feels like that's God with skin on it. 12-step literature. Doing my 12-step journal assignments. Coming into contact with godly or holy people. That affects me. When a particularly holy person, you see him praying or teaching Torah, going to Torah classes, that gives me some connection with God. Seeing people's lives transformed by the power of God in 12-step programs, that gives me a sense of God. That gives me a sense of the miracles that you see all the time in 12-step programs. Also, if you're in any 12-step program on an ongoing basis, you'll meet people who will end up committing suicide, and just the seriousness that this disease can kill you. Will settle for making you miserable, but it really wants to kill you. And when you see people who take their own lives, that just brings you back to the program in a more serious way, more committed way. And in that kind of tragedy, you feel more of an impetus to reach for God. So what connects me to God? What distracts me from God? Wow. So basically any form of excitement is kind of dangerous for me. Like when I'm watching the Dallas Cowboys, I'm not really in a very godly space. Watching Game of Thrones, I'm not in a godly space. Wow. I am still recovering from watching the 2011 Killer Joe movie, directed by William Friedkin. Bloody oath, trying to turn into my lane. Wow, Killer Joe. If only I'd known its genre. If only I'd known it was a dark comedy in Southern Gothic, I wouldn't have been as shocked That was a pretty intense film. Do not recommend it for my fellow sex addicts. Wow. So that film should have been rated X. Killer Joe, watched that last night. I'm still recovering. Not a good movie for my recovery. But if you can watch it as a comedy, go into it realizing this is a black comedy and it's not really anyone you need to root for, then it's probably a more psychologically healthy space to watch this film. Killer Joe, 2011 movie. I'm going to discuss it on Theatre Thursday with Kevin Michael Grace. So what blocks me from God? I guess my own narcissism and grandiosity. When I get really full of myself, or I get particularly giddy, and I think, oh, I did such a great show, I was so funny, and I get giddy sometimes after a great show. Like Saturday night show was awesome. So it took me a while to come down from that show. It was just so funny. When I get into that giddy state, it tends to remove me from the presence of God. When I get angry, resentful, distracted, when I don't have clarity on first things first, what's important. When I become focused on satisfying my basic instincts without respect for any higher moral code or their effect on other people, that takes me away from God. So basic instincts, what are they? Sexual, social, survival. So when I was chasing women, God wasn't really present in my life. I'd get to synagogue, I'd study Torah, and then I'd be off the hook and off chasing the broads. So that was not a state where I was connected to God. So yeah, I've pretty much always been religious, always like believing in God, but God just wasn't like real in my life. I just wasn't experiencing God on a regular basis. Kind of afraid to experience God because of how it would impinge on what I wanted to do. So I still have a lot of work to do on this writing assignment. What blocks me from God? When I just get so set on doing the things I want to do, telling the jokes I wanted to say, like making the provocative comments that I want to make without respect for other people, without regard to the consequences of my words and behavior on others, that blocks me from God. When I get bent on distracting myself with movies or Netflix or sports, or like romantic fixations, fantasies about power and influence. These things block me from God. Drivers who won't let me in their lane, that blocks me from God. Okay, so what can I do to make God real in my life? Connect to God, have a relationship with God. I gotta write about that, I gotta journal it. And I gotta call people in the program, see what they do. It's no longer sufficient to just do things my way. That has not worked out so well.